What if we were engineered? What if the story of human creation we've all grown up with, the one from Genesis, wasn't the full picture? What if it's just one version of a much older narrative, one that speaks not just to spiritual truth, but to something far more complex, even cosmic? Imagine this: humanity wasn't just willed into existence by a divine hand, but engineered carefully, intentionally by advanced beings from beyond our world. This isn't about denying God or spirituality. It's about expanding the conversation, peeling back the layers of ancient history that we've barely begun to understand. Thousands of years before the Bible was written, the ancient Sumerians recorded a creation story of their own. In their version, powerful beings called the Anunnaki descended from a distant planet named Nibiru. They weren't gods in the way we imagine today, but something else entirely: intelligent, technologically advanced beings with a mission. According to these ancient texts, the Anunnaki came to Earth not to rule or worship, but to mine gold, an element they needed to sustain their own planet's atmosphere. But mining Earth wasn't easy. The labor was grueling, and the Anunnaki themselves were not willing to continue the hard work forever. So they came up with a solution: create a worker, a new species intelligent enough to follow instructions yet controllable. That species was us. The idea that human beings may have been genetically engineered by these beings sounds like science fiction, but to the Sumerians, it was recorded history. Their texts describe how the Anunnaki combined their own genetic material with that of early hominids already living on Earth. The result was Homo sapiens, a hybrid species built to serve a purpose. Now, compare that with the story of Adam and Eve. In Genesis, God forms man from the dust of the earth and breathes life into him. In the Sumerian version, it's a literal combination of Earth's clay, early hominid DNA, and the essence of the Anunnaki. It's not so different. Even the Bible's phrase, "let us make man in our image," starts to take on a new meaning when seen through this lens. Who is us? Could it be a divine council, or a group of creators like the Anunnaki? This doesn't mean the Bible is wrong. Far from it. It might mean that the spiritual truths it teaches are built on top of a foundation that is far older, more technological, and possibly extraterrestrial. We've only been given part of the story. The rest may still be buried in ancient ruins, hidden in untranslated tablets, or simply ignored because it challenges what we think we know. But maybe it's time to ask a bigger question. Who really made us, and why? Ancient records older than the Bible, long before the Bible was ever written, ancient Sumerian texts told a very different story about how humanity came to be. These records, inscribed on clay tablets over 5,000 years ago, are some of the oldest known writings in human history, and they offer a narrative that feels strangely familiar, yet radically different. While the book of Genesis describes a divine creation driven by spiritual purpose, the Sumerian texts are more technical, more detailed, and more practical. According to these ancient sources, the Anunnaki beings from a distant planet called Nibiru came to Earth on a mission. They weren't here to spread religion or culture. They came for resources, specifically gold. This wasn't just treasure to them. Gold, according to Sumerian accounts, was essential to their survival. Their home planet was in crisis, and they needed gold to stabilize its atmosphere. Earth, rich in natural resources, became their solution. But there was a problem. The mining process was intense, dangerous, and exhausting. The Anunnaki, despite their advanced abilities, didn't want to do the hard labor themselves, so they looked for a way out. That's when the idea of creating a new species emerged, one that could handle the physical demands of mining, follow instructions, and serve the Anunnaki's needs. This is where the story takes a dramatic turn. The Sumerian texts describe how the Anunnaki took genetic material from early hominids living on Earth and blended it with their own DNA. The result was a hybrid being, us, humanity, not born purely from nature, but carefully crafted in a laboratory-like process to be workers. According to these records, we weren't the product of random evolution or purely spiritual creation. We were designed. Now, when you place this next to the Genesis story, the parallels are striking. The Bible says God created man from the dust of the ground and breathed life into him. The Sumerians say the Anunnaki took the clay of the earth, often interpreted as genetic material, and mixed it with their own life force. The outcome in both accounts is the same: a being made in the image of its creators. But the focus is different. Genesis centers on the soul, on morality, on our relationship with God. The Sumerian version is about the how, the technical process, the purpose, the intent behind our design. This doesn't mean one story is right and the other is wrong. It might mean that both are telling the same story, just from different angles, one spiritual, one historical, one focused on the why, the other on the how. Together, they offer a much deeper look at where we came from and why it matters. Yahweh and Enlil, are they the same being? When we read the Old Testament, Yahweh comes across as a powerful, commanding, sometimes even fearsome presence, a God who creates, destroys, guides, punishes, and demands loyalty. But what if the figure we know as Yahweh wasn't entirely unique? What if his character and actions reflect someone or something described in even older stories? In ancient Sumerian records, there's a being named Enlil. He was one of the leaders of the Anunnaki, a group of advanced beings believed to have come from the stars. Enlil was a ruler, a commander, and above all, an enforcer of order. And when you start comparing Enlil's behavior to Yahweh's in the Bible, the similarities are hard to ignore. Both are described as authoritative, often stern, and deeply involved in human affairs. Enlil didn't just observe humanity from afar, he actively shaped the course of events. Yahweh does the same in the Old Testament, from forming man in Genesis to guiding the Israelites through the wilderness to delivering laws and exacting justice. This isn't the image of a distant, abstract deity, it's a hands-on leader. One of the clearest parallels lies in their reactions to humanity's disobedience. In the Bible, Yahweh floods the earth to cleanse it of corruption. In the Sumerian version, it's Enlil who sends a flood to wipe out humankind, not because they were sinful, but because they were noisy, disruptive, and growing too fast. In both cases, the flood is used as a tool of control, a way to reassert authority over a creation that was no longer cooperating. Even the phrase, "You shall have no other gods before me," found in Exodus, echoes Enlil's insistence on obedience. He wanted to be recognized as the supreme ruler among gods and men alike. He wasn't interested in competition or rebellion. Sound familiar? Then there's the idea of a divine council, mentioned briefly in the Bible, like in Psalm 82. God presides in the great assembly. He renders judgment among the gods. This suggests that Yahweh may have been one among many powerful beings, just like Enlil, who led a structured hierarchy among the Anunnaki. This doesn't necessarily mean Yahweh is literally Enlil, but it raises some fascinating possibilities. Maybe Yahweh, as portrayed in the Old Testament, is a refined, monotheistic reinterpretation of an older character that once existed in a more polytheistic system. Over time, the narrative may have shifted from many gods to one, from competing powers to a single sovereign force. If that's true, it doesn't take away from the spiritual value of the Bible. In fact, it may deepen it. By understanding where these stories came from and how they evolved, we get closer to the truth not just of our faith, but of our history. Maybe Yahweh was never alone in the beginning. Maybe that was the point all along. Was the Great Flood really about morality? The story of Noah's Ark is one of the most well-known tales in the Bible. It's taught as a lesson in obedience, faith, and divine justice. According to Genesis, God looked down at humanity, saw wickedness, and decided to wipe the slate clean with a global flood, sparing only Noah, his family, and a small remnant of animals. It's a powerful story, one that shaped generations of believers. But what if this wasn't the original version? Thousands of years before the Bible was written, the ancient Sumerians recorded their own version of the flood story known as the Atrahasis epic. And the similarities are hard to dismiss. In the Sumerian account, a being named Enlil, a powerful member of the Anunnaki, decides to flood the earth and eliminate humanity. But here's the twist. The reason wasn't sin or moral failure. It was noise. Humanity, created as a labor force for the Anunnaki, had become too loud, too numerous, and too disruptive. Enlil, frustrated and overwhelmed, decided to reset the world. Sound familiar? Just like Noah in the Bible, a man named Utnapishtim was warned by another Anunnaki, Enki, who sympathized with humanity. Enki instructed him to build a giant boat, gather his family, and preserve life. The flood came. The world was destroyed, and afterward, a new covenant was established. So here's the big question. Were these two stories completely separate? Or is the biblical flood a retelling spiritualized and simplified of something much older? This doesn't mean the Bible is false. In fact, it may mean the truth is deeper than we realize. The Genesis flood may reflect a real historical event, an ancient catastrophe remembered across cultures. But instead of focusing on logistical details, the Bible zeroes in on the moral lesson, the idea that obedience to God brings salvation. But if we look at both stories side by side, a different theme begins to emerge: control. In both versions, a small group is chosen to survive, the rest are wiped away. Whether due to noise or sin, the result is the same: a massive reset, followed by a renewed relationship between humanity and its creators. In both stories, the flood becomes a psychological marker, a way to instill fear, reverence, and loyalty in future generations. Even the symbols match. The Bible gives us the rainbow, a promise never to destroy the earth by flood again. But that promise also comes with an unspoken warning: remember what I can do. So maybe the flood wasn't just about punishment. Maybe it was a calculated move, a divine or extraterrestrial decision to reassert power over a creation that had grown out of control. For believers, this perspective doesn't have to challenge faith. Instead, it invites us to look deeper. What if the flood wasn't just a story of destruction, but one of design? The Tower of Babel, a story of control. We've all heard the story of the Tower of Babel. A united humanity speaking one language decides to build a tower that reaches the heavens. It's usually taught as a warning against pride and arrogance, as if humans, in their ambition, tried to become gods. But what if that's not the full story? What if Babel wasn't about pride at all, but about control? In the biblical version, found in Genesis 11, humanity comes together after the flood. They're organized, collaborative, and ambitious. They begin building a massive tower to make a name for themselves. But then Yahweh comes down, sees what they're doing, and reacts. He confuses their language and scatters them across the earth. On the surface, this seems like divine punishment. But if you read between the lines, it feels more like a strategic move, a deliberate effort to slow down human progress. Why would an all-powerful God fear a tower? To ancient people, tall structures weren't just buildings, they were symbols of knowledge, unity, and power. The Tower of Babel may not have been about reaching God's physical space in the sky. It might have been about humanity reaching a new level of technological or spiritual advancement, something that could threaten the authority of the gods. The Sumerian texts provide a compelling parallel. In their stories, humanity was created by the Anunnaki to serve as laborers. One of the Anunnaki, Enki, wanted to help humans grow and learn. But his brother Enlil believed that if humanity advanced too far, they could become a threat. So he worked to suppress their development, limiting their knowledge and dependence. Sound familiar? Yahweh's actions at Babel mirror Enlil's philosophy. Divide and scatter, limit communication, disrupt collaboration, prevent unity. These are all tools of containment, not punishment. If humanity was on the verge of rediscovering ancient knowledge, possibly the same knowledge shared by the Anunnaki in the distant past, the tower might have represented a return to that power. And those in charge weren't ready to let that happen. Even the architecture fits. Many scholars believe the Tower of Babel was modeled after a ziggurat, a stepped temple commonly found in Mesopotamia. These weren't just places of worship. Some theorists believe they were also communication hubs, possibly even landing platforms or technological centers tied to the Anunnaki. So what if Babel wasn't just a myth, but a memory? A memory of a time when humanity came close to reclaiming something. It had lost a connection to its true origins and potential only to be cut off again. The message, then, changes. The Tower of Babel isn't just about arrogance. It's about what happens when humanity gets too close to the truth and how those in power might act to keep that truth hidden. And maybe, just maybe, we've been trying to rebuild that tower ever since. Were biblical miracles really technology? When we read the Bible, especially the Old Testament, we come across stories filled with incredible, almost unbelievable events: seas parting, fire descending from the sky, mysterious food appearing overnight. These are the miracles that shaped faith for millions. But as our understanding of science and technology grows, a serious question arises: what if these miracles weren't supernatural at all but technological? Let's take the parting of the Red Sea, for example. In Exodus, Moses stretches out his hand and the waters divide, allowing the Israelites to escape Pharaoh's army. The Bible mentions a strong east wind blowing all night. To the people of that time, it was nothing short of divine intervention. But today, some scientists and theorists suggest that advanced technology like atmospheric or gravitational manipulation could have produced such an effect. What seemed like a miracle may have been an operation using tools far beyond human understanding at the time. Then there's the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night that led the Israelites through the desert. In modern terms, that description sounds a lot like some kind of hovering craft or energy-based beacon. A glowing, moving light in the sky seen from the ground would absolutely appear miraculous to a Bronze Age society. But could it have been a form of aerial guidance system, maybe even a surveillance or transport device? Even manna, the strange food that appeared daily to feed the Israelites, raises questions. It's described as fine, flaky, white, and appearing like dew in the morning. It kept an entire population alive for decades. Some theorists suggest this could have been bioengineered nutrition, produced by advanced machines capable of synthesizing food from available elements. If extraterrestrial or higher beings had this kind of tech, giving bread from heaven to the people would fulfill a divine promise without needing magic. To the ancient world, any technology far beyond their understanding would look like a miracle. But Arthur C. Clarke once said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. That idea fits perfectly here. If we look at these stories through a modern lens, not to disprove faith, but to explore it more deeply, an intriguing possibility emerges. What if Yahweh wasn't a formless, invisible presence, but a being with access to extraordinary technology? What if the so-called miracles were demonstrations of power, yes, but also of machinery, science, and knowledge we simply didn't have yet? This doesn't mean the Bible is wrong. It just means we might need to rethink how we interpret it. The spiritual message still holds faith, obedience, divine purpose, but the tools used to deliver that message may have been far more advanced than we imagined. Maybe the real miracle isn't that these things happened. Maybe the real miracle is that we're finally beginning to understand how they could have happened. Hidden truths. Why is knowledge being suppressed? What if the real story of humanity, where we came from, who created us, and why has been deliberately hidden? Across cultures, ancient texts like the Sumerian records, the Bible, and the mysterious emerald tablets of Thoth all point to something bigger than we've been told. These writings speak of powerful beings, part divine, part extraterrestrial, who not only shaped early civilizations, but also controlled what knowledge humans were allowed to access. In the Emerald Tablets, we find references to beings capable of manipulating energy, bending time and space, and guiding human spiritual evolution. The Sumerians told of the Anunnaki, powerful figures who created humans to serve specific purposes. Even the Bible is filled with accounts of gods interacting directly with people, offering wisdom, then punishing those who defy them. Taken together, these ancient sources suggest there was once a much broader understanding of the universe, technology, and the human soul, but it was sealed off, hidden, or erased. The big question is, why? Why would anyone want to keep that kind of truth from humanity? The answer is simple: control. When people lack knowledge of their true origins and potential, they're easier to manipulate. Throughout history, access to sacred or powerful information has always been reserved for the few, the priests, the elites, the rulers. Today, it's no different. Hidden archives like the Vatican Library, classified government research, and ancient artifacts locked away from public view all suggest that much of what we think we know is just the surface. This isn't just a theory, it's a pattern. From ancient Babylon to modern institutions, information has been filtered, edited, and withheld, and those who dare to question the official story, often dismissed, silenced, or labeled as conspiracy theorists. But here's the thing: seeking the truth isn't dangerous, it's necessary. Understanding where we come from gives us the power to choose where we go next. If we were created by higher beings, whether gods, extraterrestrials, or a fusion of both, then maybe we're more than just random life form. Maybe we're part of a much bigger design. And maybe, just maybe, we're capable of far more than we've been led to believe. Look around today. We're in a world full of distractions, division, and shallow narratives, but people are waking up. They're asking questions, connecting dots, and looking beyond what they've been told. That's where change begins, not with rebellion, but with awareness. The story of hidden knowledge isn't just about ancient times, it's happening right now. And the lesson is clear: never stop asking questions. Whether you're reading ancient texts, listening to new theories, or simply paying attention to the patterns around you, remember, truth doesn't fear discovery. It only fears silence. So ask, seek, challenge, because the more we uncover, the closer we get not just to history, but to ourselves.